Okay, so in this video we're going to start on the image upload functionality. So we need to start in the back end because our server needs to be able to handle file uploads. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create an endpoint at API/upload, and we're going to use something called Multer, which is a Node.js middleware for handling multi-part form data, which is primarily used for uploading files. So this is pretty popular for Node.js. You can see 1.5, almost 1.5 million downloads per week. And there's other things you could add. I mean, with Multer, there's other packages, like if you wanted to use Amazon S3 buckets or something like that. But we're just going to upload the file to the server. Now, the documentation here is actually really confusing. Everything is very spread out. The only part that I really want to show you here is this. So we're going to want to set our storage engine to multer.disk storage. And then we have two functions, a destination and a file name. And the syntax is a little weird. We pass in the request, the file, and then a callback, and then we call that callback. Pass in null as the error, and then the location, or the destination, I should say, of where we want our files to go. And then file name, we just create the file name however we want. Here it's using, from this file object, the field name and then -date. So we'll do something like that. And in addition to that, I want to make sure that it's an image, that it's a JPEG or a PNG. All right, so let's go to Express. I stopped my server, and I'm going to run npm install multer in the root. Make sure you don't run it in the front end. And then let's npm run dev, start everything back up. And we're going to take a break from the front end here. I'm going to keep the product edit screen open though, because we're going to come back to that. Now, where I want to upload these images is in the root. I'll have a folder called upload. So I'm just going to create that now. And inside uploads, I'm just going to add a file.txt file and just say add to git repo. That way it gets added to our repository even if there's nothing in it. Now, in the back end, in routes here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this upload routes.js. Now, this is where we're going to put our route, which is just one. It's just API/upload, but we're also going to put all of our config and our validation and stuff for Multer. We're going to put all that in here as well. So let's start off by bringing in Express. And then we want to bring in Multer as well. And we're going to have a route here, so let's create a router. And then let's export as default the router. All right, so before we actually create the route, I just want to do just the config. So let's create a variable called storage, and we want to initialize our storage engine, which is going to be multer.disk storage, and we're going to pass in an object with two functions. First is destination, and this is going to take in request, file, and callback. So this is basically what I showed you in the docs. And then we call that callback null because there's no error. And then we want to add where we want to upload, which is going to be a file called uploads. So upload slash. Next, we want the file name. Oops. So file name. And this is going to take in the same thing, request, file, and callback. And then here we want to call the callback, pass in null for the error, and then whatever we want to call this our upload. So they obviously have to have different names. You don't want to just use the file name. We have access to like file.original name, but what happens if someone uploads two images with the same name? So we're going to format this. Let's put in backticks here. And we have access to file.field name. So we're going to use that, and then a dash. So after the curly brace, dash, and then let's open up another money sign curly braces, and let's do date.now. So we'll add the date, And then for the extension, I want to get the extension of the actual file. So instead of just adding JPEG and making it all JPEGs, if it's a PNG, I want it to be a PNG. So the way we can do that is, let's open this up, and we're going to use the path module from Node. So I'm going to bring that in up here. So import path from path. All right, and then path actually has a method on it called extName. So I'm going to say .extName, and what this does is it gets the extension of a file name. So I can pass in here now file.originalName, and that will this will basically pull off the extension. So if it's a JPEG, it'll pull off JPEG, and it'll add it to our file name. So ultimately, it's going to be the field name -date dot and then whatever the extension is. And this will include the dot, so we don't have to manually add it. Okay, now down here after storage, let's say const upload, and this is basically what we're going to pass in as middleware to our route. We're going to set this to multer and pass in an object with the storage. Now this will work, but it'll allow us to upload any type of file, which I don't want to do. So there's also, we can pass in this file filter, which is going to be a function that takes in the same thing, request file CB. And instead of putting everything in here, I'm going to create a custom function called check file type. I actually got this off Stack Overflow, this exact syntax. So we're going to pass in file and CB, and then I'm going to create that function up here. So let's say function check file type, pass in our file and callback. And the way we're going to do this is just first create an expression with the file types that we want. So let's say file types. We're creating an expression, so we want just forward slashes around this, and it can be JPEG or JPEG or PNG. Okay, now let's create a variable called extName, and we're going to take file types. We're going to take that expression and test it against the extension for the file name that's passed in. Okay, so the way we can do that, once again, we can say path.extName. I know this might be a little confusing. This is different than this. This is a method that's on this path object. This is just a variable we're creating, so don't get those confused. And again, what this does is it gets the extension from a file. So I'm going to pass in here the file.originalName, just like I did up here, to get the extension. And then I just want to make this 2 lowercase. So let's say 2 lowercase parentheses. So that will give us, what this test does is this will give us a true or false. So if we pass in the extension and it matches here, it's going to be true. If it doesn't match one of these, it'll be false. We also want to check the MIME type. So every file has a MIME type, like a JPEG is image/JPEG or whatever. So we want to check that as well. So we'll run that against file types .test. So we can access file.mime type. We're going to pass that in there. So it has to have one of these in the MIME type. Okay. Well, right now these are just going to be true or false. So we want to make sure that they're both true before we move on. So let's say if extName and MIME type. So if that's true, then we're good. We want to return our callback and pass in null for the error and just pass true here. Else, then we're going to call the callback, but we're going to pass in an error this time, and we'll say images only. And that's going to get called here. So now we should be able to validate the type of image or the extension. So that's all we want to do for the config. Now let's create the route or the endpoint. So router.post, and this is, we're just going to use slash here because this upload routes file is going to be connected to API/upload. And then we want to pass in here as middleware upload, and we can do multiple images if we wanted to, but we're doing just one image, so we want to call upload.single. And we're going to call it image. So when we upload on the front end, we want to just remember to call it image. And then we want to also pass in request response. And all we're going to send back from this route is the path. So we'll pass in some backticks and just say slash. And then we have access to request.file.path. And that's it. That'll give us the path. And then on the front end, we can set it to this image piece of our state, and it'll go in the database. All right, now we want to go to our server.js now that that's all set, and let's bring in upload routes. Okay, just like we did for the rest of these upload routes. So that brings in the file. Now we need to mount it down here like we did with these. So this will be upload routes, and it's going to be API/upload. That's going to be the endpoint that we hit. Now there's just one more thing we need to do. This uploads folder is not going to be accessible by default. What we need to do is make this a static folder so that it can get loaded in the browser. So making a folder static in Express is actually pretty easy. So we're going to go right down here and say app.use and then /uploads, and then as a second argument we're going to pass in express.static. So this is how we can make a folder static. So we just want to point to that uploads folder. So I'm going to actually bring in the path module. So import path from path. It's just a Node.js module to work with file paths, and inside this static here, let's pass in path.join so we can just join different segments of files. And I want the current folder, so _dir name. Now this _dir name, if you're familiar with Node.js, you probably know that this will point to the current directory. However, this is not available if we're using ES modules. It's only available if we're using CommonJS, which is the require syntax. However, we can mimic this. We'll just create a variable called _dir name, and we can mimic that by using path.resolve, okay, which will just it'll act in the same way. And then from there, we would just want to go /uploads. Okay, so all this is doing is just taking us to that uploads folder, and we're making it static with express.static. So let's save that, and now we should be all set for the back end. All right, so next in the next video, we're going to go ahead and implement that by making a request from our product edit screen. We're going to add a little file upload button that will then make a request to that endpoint.